Clapper board, you're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled Instructor Said, No Kill Moves in Class. Human raised her hand and asked, unarmed or improvised. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. The first sound on Uhlan station was the soft, patient thrum of the circulation fans, as if the entire academy were breathing in its sleep. The second sound was the click of Instructor Veyer's 4 taloned feet as he stepped onto the training deck, obsidian black, glistening with a matte sheen that had seen wars finished and kingdoms buried. Rows of recruits stood waiting under white strip lights, species from worlds that smelled like lightning, kelp, copper, dust, rain. Armor plates whispered, tails tapped, gills fluttered in contained aquariums that haloed with blue. Restraint, Veyer said, his voice an iron bell in a cathedral of polycarbon. Today you will end a fight without ending a life. No kill strikes, no maiming, no permanent harm. He didn't have to say no human tricks. Everyone heard it anyway. Near the edge of the formation stood Cadet Mara Keene. Human, not tall, not something you would pick from a parade and think danger. She wore the academy's gray weave like it belonged to someone else, and it had agreed to lend itself for the day. Her brown hair was tied back, her eyes unreadable except for the stillness, the kind of unmoving focus you only see at the mouth of a storm. Her hand went up. Veyer's upper right arm folded across his breast, an instructor's skeptical poise. Cadet Keene. Sir, Mara said, voice steady. Unarmed or improvised. The words moved through the class like a cold wind. Some species chittered. Some blinked inner eyelids. A Iharnex in the third row flexed armored claws that looked like a cathedral window made of knives. A Veil-born smirked without a mouth. Veyer's head inclined. Explain your meaning. You said no kill moves, Mara replied. I'm asking if that includes improvised weapons or just unarmed techniques. Are you implying you can kill with improvised tools? Mara didn't blink. Yes, sir. The silence that followed had edges. Veyer let it rest there, let the class hear their own heartbeats. Finally, he gestured. Pair off, begin. They paired her with the Iharnex, the storm world giant with obsidian plates and the confidence of something that had never been prey. The floor lights undercut their shadows in cool strips. Veyer's lower left hand slashed the air. Commence. The Iharnex came in hard, arms like piston rods. Mara slid, pivoted, and put her forearm into the alien's wrist at an angle that didn't fight force but welcomed it aside. Her heel stamped the single soft seam at the back of the knee where volcanic glass gave way to living ligament. The giant folded, surprised more than injured, and she stepped back without gloating, hands open, weight coiled and calm. Continue, Veyer said. They came together again. Mara's fingers brushed the floor and came up with a drop training baton, rubberized composite, dead weight to most, a story to her. She didn't swing, she levered. The baton became a fulcrum, the Iharnex's momentum a mistake, and in 2 breaths the giant's arm was pinned harmlessly behind its carapaced back. Yield, Mara said. 2 taps on alloy, she released. The Iharnex stood slowly, considering this fragile mammal who'd made gravity her accomplice. Veyer's eyes glowed faintly, a veteran recognizing old music. Efficient, he said. Borderline excessive for restraint, but efficient. Mara gave the smallest nod. I learned from people who didn't leave second chances, sir. The room didn't laugh this time. By night cycle, the corridor lounges hummed with rumor. Humans were novelty at the academy, a species new to the Concord, loud on the comms, quiet in the rooms where decisions turned. They carried their storms inside them. Now they carried a name, Keene. Whispered beside words like wrench, cable, door hinge. The gentle awe reserved for predators who prefer not to hunt. Veyer rearranged the rotation. He set Mara against a telekinetic Emlar who fought like falling leaves caught by a clever wind. He set her against a Veilborn who shed shapes like breath and learned people faster than they learned the floor plan. He set her against a Turan, a reptilian spring, all tail and torque, limbs that understood leverage with a dancer's contempt for friction. She bled, she bruised. She limped for 2 days after the Mlar drove thought through her guard and reminded her that pain is also a language, but she learned. She never stopped at victory, she kept looking for how to stop tomorrow's version sooner. The Mlar noticed. The Veilborn watched her hands. The Turan nodded once like a craftsman seeing another recognize a tool. In the mess hall one night, Kethra, the Turan with scales like liquid glass, sat across from her, tray steaming with something that smelled like pepper and rain. "They say your world hurts itself," Kethra said. Turan's speech turned sibilants into small knives, but the sentence wasn't a cut. Mara considered her spoon, the dent in it where some bored cadet had spent an hour trying to turn steel into something else. "We learned to stop the bleeding," she answered. "Mostly. Does that make you proud?" "No," Mara said, and her voice put down a weight between them that was not anger. "Just careful." "Careful kills slower," Kethra observed. "Careful lets the people behind you live longer," Mara said. Kethra's head canted, a Turan smile you had to learn to see. "Ah," she said, "you point your care backward. Interesting." And then 3 days later, the galaxy came to class. The first alarm was a tremor in the deck, a small long wave, like a giant telling a joke to another giant in a voice too deep to reach ears. The second was the howling of the breach sirens, their pitch designed by 10 species and hated by all of them. The lights pivoted to emergency crimson. Students spilled into hallways, a fracture of colors and fear and training, while command voices barked orders into the comms. Mara ran. At Observation Bay 7, she caught a glimpse through the voyageless. The stars had new edges. Ships crawled out of nothingness like midnight turning into blades. Angular hulls, jagged plates, a geometry that made your eyes feel like they were standing at the wrong angle to reality. No transponders, no signatures. When one turned, light didn't slide, it bent. "Jarn," someone whispered. The word wasn't a species name, it was a verdict. They were not empire or nation. They were contagion hammered into machinery and taught to have a hunger. They harvested everything. Matter. Energy. Mind. The academy was a school with security, not a fortress with a school inside it. Instructor Veyer met the sprinting flood of cadets in Junction Delta with 2 plasma rifles across his back and a comm like a commandment. "This station is not built to fight a war," he said. "So we will not. We will hold long enough to evacuate." He looked at Mara and a few others whose names had risen in his mind in a column called "If I Must Trust." Keene, Kethra, Rez of Vale. You are Beta. You hold the docking spines. Non-lethal is rescinded. "Sir," Mara said. They ran. In docking spine 2, the air stank of hot metal and the kind of electricity your teeth can taste. Plasma cutters moaned against the outer doors like whales begging ashore. Beta Squad erected barricades in the old-school way with new-school steel, cargo crates, blast shields, a line of small decisions that ended in a choice to stand. "Positions," Mara called, because Veyer had given her the word lead and something in her bones refused to say no when the cost was other people. "Get low, breathe slow. If you run out of ammo, break the room until it's a weapon." The doors went white, then orange, then the color of a planet's first wound. When they peeled inward, the Jarn swarmed through, black limbs, razors, eyes like quarry lights in midnight pits. They didn't roar. They didn't announce. They just came. Beta's first volley turned half the front rank into smoking husks. The second volley did less. The third was a grim kind of arithmetic. When an eel-thin drone lanced a cadet through the shoulder, Mara moved without plan. She ripped a plasma conduit from a wall bracket, tore the sleeve from it with a twist, and sent liquid fire arcing through a clump of drones that had learned to walk shoulder to shoulder to share hits. They seized, burned, fell in a choreography that smelled like pennies and rainstorm ion. Right flank. Rez shouted, Rez who had no single shape and right now wore a body like polished basalt pouring itself into sinew. Ceiling. They were everywhere, the Jarn, under plating behind vents in the blind corners between rivets and reinforced steel. The fight became less choreography, more brawl. Kethra's tail flicked like a whip, knocking drones into the kiss of a thermal vent that Mara had forced open with a crowbar. A Emlar held 3 machines frozen mid-lunge with a migraine's fist, while another cadet drove a cargo hook through the nearest and leaped aside before the death spark backlash would have taken his face off. Fall back to Corridor 7, Veyer's voice ordered across all channels. Calm, heavy. His calm was always heavier when death was within earshot. Copy, Mara said, breaking a drone's knee with the edge of a riot shield, then lifting the same shield to wedge a vent open for Kethra to rake a claw through. On me. They moved. Jarn followed. The hallways turned to rooms and rooms turned to choke points. Every corner was a quick class, a lesson you only pass by living past it. When Bader reached a maintenance shaft, Rez poured his body through the grid like shadow becoming a net, and sealed it shut with his own weight while Kethra welded the seam. Mara grabbed a spool of high-tension cable, looped it through a pulley above a door, and made a trap that had no right to work in a fight fought with energy and thought. It worked. The first drone to rush the threshold decapitated itself on a line designed to lift cargo, not harvest heads. The next 2 learned, ducked, pushed. Mara clicked the lever and the pulley spun. The line snapped free and lashed a cluster into a stumbling bundle long enough for Beta to turn them into parts. Improvised, Kethra muttered, not unamused. You humans carry apocalypse in your pockets. We carry home repair, Mara said, breathing through teeth. We repurpose. The station shook hard enough to make the lights skip. Shields at 9%, someone called from somewhere. Evacuation corridor compromised, said another voice. Security node 4 offline, said a third. Beta status, Veyer's voice came, his comm starting to fray the way steel frays, not cracking but revealing strands. Holding at 7, Mara answered. We can't hold for long. Long enough, Veyer said, and there was something in the way his throat made the words that told Mara he has already planned to die if it buys time for children. Negative, she said before she could stop herself. We're not caching you for minutes. That is an order, Veyer replied, and then, maybe because he knew humans break when orders sound like death sentences given to fathers, he added softer, we don't sell lives, we buy futures. Copy, Mara said, which is soldier for I heard you and will try not to bury you now. They fell again. They built a line out of a janitorial bot and a spool of microfiber towel. They turned a ceiling sprinkler into a conductor and a patch of floor into a lake that could electrocute anything with more hubris than insulation. They taught the station to be a partner. When the second barricade went red with heat and then lake blue with coolant and then something darker with machine blood, Mara saw something that stuck like a shard. One Jarn drone paused. Not quite a halt, more like the idea of hesitation. It tilted its head as if listening. Then it turned once and walked backward through its fellows who flowed around it like a river around a stone. Veyer, Mara called, are they coordinating around a node? Affirmative, Veyer answered. They move like a chorus, find the conductor. Toward the spine's end, past the emergency shutters that stuttered like a dying heart, the Jarn swarmed thickest. Something larger moved behind the crowd. You didn't see it. You inferred it the way a shadow told a story about a person you hadn't met yet. Keene, Kethra hissed, pupils wide to black. They're preparing a wave. Mara's lungs were knives, her thighs screamed at her every step. She could feel the map of her body in the language of damage. She took a breath and let her eyes blur, tricking her mind out of the too human habit of looking for faces and names. She looked for structure. She saw it, a scaffolding of motion, emptiness and density moving like a muscle around bone. The bone was a tower on 6 asymmetric legs, tall as a shuttle, studded in antennae like thorns. She tapped Rez's forearm. "Do you see it?" Rez's surface rippled, then became still. "I see the absence where its signal subtracts noise." "Good," Mara said. "We make a road." They didn't have grenades left in the right places. They didn't have a clear shot. They had supplies. Mara slammed her shoulder into a supply cabinet and it popped, sending a carnival of small tools and bad ideas across the floor. She grabbed 6 emergency magnetic grapples, tossed 3 to Kethra, 3 to Rez. "We carve a lane, north wall, I'll draw." "Draw with what?" Kethra demanded, already moving. Mara held up a coil of thin wire and smiled a wrong-time smile. "Conductive thread, sewing kit." They moved. Kethra vaulted a barricade, tail bladed into a spear. Rez flattened against a wall and slid forward like he had taught himself to be a paint. The Jarn wheeled, the room becoming a bad diagram of death. Mara ran in a half-crouch, unspooling thread between her fingers, laying a hairline trip across their feet, their knees, their hunger. The first wave stumbled. The second leaped and found their ankles snared. Kethra's grapples thunked into the wall, yanked again. The wall panel blew outward and a roar of pressurized air tore a smaller lane. Rez's body rose, became thick, became a shield that was also a blade. "Lane," Mara bellowed. They plunged. The Jarn tower turned, antennae swiveling toward threat, legs stabbing down. It didn't scream, but the frequency of the air went mean. Veyer's voice cut in. "Beta, evacuations continue. Hold for 90 more seconds." "Copy," Mara said, and then, more to herself than the calm, "Make it 60. She reached the tower and learned immediately that it was not merely metal. A limb like a black scythe scythed. She ducked. It nicked her shoulder and the world flashed white for a heartbeat. Kethra leapt onto a leg and rode it upward, claws throwing sparks. Rez flowed into a slot and came out of another 6 meters higher, jamming himself like a clot into a gear and drinking the friction. The tower staggered. Mara went for the place where limbs met body. A plate shivered with each step. Beneath it she heard current chew itself. She jammed a grapple into the seam and thumbed the charge. In the half-second before the magnet bit she muttered because it didn't feel appropriate to pray and it also didn't feel wrong, unarmed and improvised. Then she leapt back. The magnet engaged. The tower jerked, pivoted, tried to tear free. The grapple cable thrummed a note like a piano, overly proud of its bass. Kethra, Rez, anchor. They did. The tower went to one knee because the universe is still ruled by leverage when empires pretend it isn't. Mara climbed the cable and ripped another plate loose with a knife you were only allowed to carry if you promised to use it for rope and apples. Beneath the plate, motors, a hummingbird's heart with too many beats to survive calm, and a fissure of light where thought burned. The Jarn tower tried to think through her. Mara's hand found the only thing in reach that wasn't a theory, the sewing kit, conductive thread. She stringed it across contacts like a spider building a house, then looped it through a half-melted ring and tied the ugliest knot in recorded history. "Now," she said, not loudly, not with ceremony, and jammed a plasma battery into the mess. The tower went bright. The room went brighter. Sound left and came back with a stutter like old film. For a breath Mara couldn't tell if she had lived or merely made a very well-argued case for it. Then she was on the floor, lungs remembering hurt like lovers revisiting a fight, Kethra hauling her backward by the collar, Rez dragging himself out of a vent with half his mass sizzling. The Jarn line stumbled. The choreography collapsed. What had been a chorus became a crowd. The tower's lights flickered, then one by one went out like a city losing power district by district. "No down," Veyer said, and for the first time his voice sounded like someone who had just seen a child do something that finally allowed him to put down a weight he had carried so long it had become part of his spine. "Beta, fall back to Hangar 1. Last evac wave in 90. They ran again. Running in armor is a negotiation with your own mortality. Running while trailing 5 kinds of blood is a promise you make to a future you haven't met. They bartered air for distance and spent pain like small coins. Hangar 1 was a cathedral of steel with the doors blown open to a wedge of starlight and the cries of engines refusing to apologize for burning. Evac pods gulped frightened bodies and spat hope into the cold. Jarn drones pressed through the cargo access like a tide that hated coasts. Circle, Mara ordered, because everything in her said to spread out and everything in the room said if they did they'd be eaten in segments. Shields up, fire on my mark. Res sealing vent. Kethra left flank, they'll try to climb the loader. Not try, Kethra said. Succeed. Her tail snapped a drone off the loader like flicking a beetle from a dinner plate. The last long minutes of a defense do not belong to speeches. They belong to mechanics. Mara broke a cargo strap's ratchet with a kick and looped it into a sling that turned a toolbox into a meteor. She found a fallen riot baton and threaded a length of wire through its handle to give it reach and venom. When her rifle coughed out its last bitter breath, she threw it like a club, and it broke a drone's eye, and she felt a wrongness like blasphemy and also relief because the gun had outlived its own certainty. Last pod. A controller yelled, voice young and too high and cracked with terror. Hold, Mara said, and it was not a command so much as a request you couldn't refuse because somewhere under the word hold the syllables spelled please. Jarn came like a weather pattern, wind against cliff, rain against roof, dark against candle. Beta stood. Mara moved in a circle within the circle, a small gravity around which her people orbited. She pushed Kethra back a step when her tail dragged, and 4 drones used that drag as consensus. She slammed a door on a drone's wrist and used the handle as a tourniquet for the rest of it. She threw the toolbox meteor. It sang. It came back. She missed the catch and it bit her thumb to the bone. She laughed because you laugh when you've forgotten how else to keep your mouth used for life. Keene, Veyer said across the comms, not asking permission, already halfway to disobedience. I am en route to you. Negative, she replied, and for a moment there was the softest smile in the blood. We've got it. The last pod launched. The hangar doors started to close. Jarn slammed the gap and stuck like burrs on a dog. Mara caught the manual override cable and leaned backward, body a counterweight to a door the size of a dream you only have when you're young enough to think planets are only big because you haven't grown yet. Her shoulders shrieked. Kethra hooked a claw into a bracket and added herself to the hinge. Rez climbed the seam and became a gasket, his skin smoking where energy tried to write its signature on him. The door took the hint. It moved. The gap narrowed. Air whistled as if someone had decided to teach it how to sing. Jarn forced limbs through, prying like thieves at a window. Mara batted them down like snakes, breath coming in sawtooth jerks. One scythe blade kissed her ribs and left an argument she answered with a boot heel and a grunt that wasn't a word. The door closed. The lock slammed home. The hangar went quiet except for the sound of a few unbroken lives trying to take more breaths than their lungs had expected to give today. Mara leaned her forehead against the cold door and said nothing for a moment because gratitude is easier without grammar. Keene, Veyer said from the opposite side of the room, his voice now a body, his eyes not glowing but soft. You did it. She turned, bleeding and smiling in a way that looked like a sunrise that had been taught math. We did it. He wanted to say many things. He said only medical. She shook her head. Later. Now Veyer countered, but his lower right hand reached up and brushed very carefully the edge of a burn on her shoulder, and the gesture wasn't instructor to cadet. It was soldier to soldier, the ceremony of I saw you. They made it to medbay. They didn't all stay conscious to be proud about it. The academy lived. Not whole, not unmarred, but alive enough to count. 16 pods made it out. 4 returned with ships too big and teeth too sharp for a school because the Concorde had heard the station scream and answered with people who had a specific set of skills. The Jarn left not because they had lost interest but because they understood calculus too, the point at which return on devouring dips into red. News traveled the way news does in civilizations whose true currency is story. A human cadet had asked if she should kill with unarmed or improvised, and when extinction applied for a teaching credential, she had checked the box both. Concorde channels argued. Some wanted medals. Some wanted scolding. Some wanted to never admit that the universe had asked a child to anchor a door with her body. Veyer wrote a report like a cathedral, arching, spare, buttressed by facts that held weight. He named names. He did not say legend once. He said work 24 times. The council read it and nodded and made more policies than anyone could live under. Mara slept for 27 hours and then woke to Kethra, tail wrapped in gauze, sitting with a datapad across her knees. "You're awake," Kethra said, stating the obvious the way friends do when obviousness is a thank you note with enough stamps. "How long?" Mara asked. "Long enough for me to consider eating your ration pack," Kethra admitted. "I did not." Heroic restraint. They sat in soft beeping. Rez flowed through the doorway, thinner than before, his surface matte where it had been mirror. "I've been promoted to safety signage," he said, each word a ripple. "Maintenance keeps asking if I can fill gaps indefinitely. I said yes, but I charge by the existential crisis." Mara smiled. "We can form a union." Veyer arrived with a fourth figure, Administrator Lon, a being made of filaments and nothing, and the bureaucratic confidence of someone who could stack minutes into hours by decree. "Cadet Keene," Lon said, voice like paper across glass, "you are to be commended." Mara shifted, wincing. "Sir, with respect commend Beta." "We will," Lon replied, unoffended, "and we'll also change some curriculum. It seems we underestimated the utility of what did you call it?" Their filaments fluttered, searching the memory. "Home repair." "Improvisation," Mara said. "Improvisation," Lon repeated, tasting it like a new spice. "We'll codify a doctrine." Veyer's lower arms crossed. "We should codify a story." Lon's filaments paused. Bureaucracy had not expected poetry today. "A story. A reminder," Veyer said, looking at Mara, at Kethra, at Rez. "That survival is not one victory but many small refusals." Lon inclined. "We can codify that too." They left. Mara's eyes closed again, the medbay making small comforting sounds. Kethra dozed with her jaw propped in her palm. Rez hummed to himself, a tone like a low lamp. The academy rebuilt. Scars became seams. Seams became new lines in the architecture. A brass plaque appeared in the training hall without ceremony, installed by someone who had not asked permission because permission is often a way to hide a desire to say no. The plaque read, "Keen protocol, when every weapon breaks, break the room more cleverly. Protect the ones behind you. Spend nothing you cannot afford except yourself, and only when the purchase is time." It was too much. It was not enough. That's how stories work when you use them as tools. Classes resumed, and Veyer strode in with the same old gait and the new habit of looking at the floor as if it were a partner. "Restraint," he said to a fresh crop of recruits with eyes like untested steel. "Today you will end a fight without ending a life. No kill strikes, no maiming." A human hand rose in the third row. "Sir," the cadet said, "unarmed or improvised." The room grinned a collective grin you could hear. Veyer's eyes softened. "Both," he said, "but today we will practice the art of leaving your enemy alive without gifting them your future." And he called out names, and he watched movements, and he filed away notes for the day the galaxy would ask again. The Jarn didn't forget. They don't have memory like organic minds, they have ledger. They came again, but not here, not yet. They bit at the edges of the Concorde, testing where the metal thinned. The Concorde sent ships. The Concorde sent heroes. The Concorde sent letters home with words that break and mend the same hearts. Mara returned to drills with a disparity between her capacity for humor and her capacity for sleep that even medbay couldn't smooth. When the corridor lights were dim and her roommates snored in languages designed by wind and water, she walked. In one of those walks she found the maintenance deck where the old janitorial bot sat dented but upright, its mop arms folded like a priest in a pew. "You did good," she told the bot, which had no ears. "You were a wall when a wall was what we had." Someone behind her coughed. Rez flowed down a ladder like Mercury obeying stairs. "You're giving speeches to inanimate objects," he said. "They are easier audiences," she replied. "True, but they don't clap." "People don't clap either," Mara said. "They just survive, that's applause." Rez considered. "You humans write poetry when you should sleep." "I'm bad at sleeping," she admitted. "Always have been." "Before the academy?" Rez asked, his voice more question than probe. "Before," she said, "Earth. The war that hadn't been won but was many small ones you fought in kitchens and alleys and rooms where the lights went out not because the grid failed but because someone with a gun told them to." She hadn't told anyone here those stories. She told the floor now, held them like it held steps. "We learned to fix what broke with the tools we had. Sometimes that was a pan, sometimes a mop, sometimes a laugh, and sometimes a sewing kit," Rez murmured, "and sometimes a sewing kit." She smiled to herself. "My grandmother taught me to stitch. She said everything is just thread with a good story." Rez rippled. "Your grandmother sounds like a dangerous woman." She was. Kethra found them there later, tail dragging like a banner after a battle. And they shared fruit bars, and the old academy joked that if you used enough duct tape the universe lost interest and moved to a different problem. They laughed softly, the way survivors laugh when humor is not a betrayal but a bridge. A month later, the Concorde called. Not a day on a calendar. A chord in the comms, a tone you answer because the alternative is someone else's name read into a room full of chairs. A colony in the Ryan fold, small, mostly agricultural, with a sky that tasted like mineral candy when it rained, had stopped talking. Patrol found nothing they wanted to describe. The Jarn were not an empire, but they experimented the way viruses do, not with a scientist's curiosity, but with a blind insistence on more. Uhlan sent a detachment with 2 instructors and a handful of senior cadets because the academy was not the sort that hid its children behind steel when steel asked for help. Vayer took command. "Keene, Kethra Rez," he said, "pack for quiet and for noise." The colony had a name. It stuck in the throat of the ship's AI like grief. Blue houses low to the ground so the wind could hop them. Irrigation canals that shone like small false rivers. When they arrived, everything looked like a photograph with one color removed. "They left," Kethra said, nostrils flaring, every Turin's first sense. "Not run, not carried, left." "Jarn don't leave," Rez said. "They repurpose." Mara knelt by a door whose lock had been opened by someone who knew the code and respected the knob. On the wood, a thread, blue, the right kind of blue. She rolled it between finger and thumb. Someone stitched a message. They found it in small places if they looked. A stain on a table in the shape of a number translated 30 times to find meaning. A length of twine tied around a post in a knot that said east in an old Earth sailor's language. A toy left on a windowsill with its arms in the position a dancer uses to say danger. No one had planned it, but when you teach people to fix their lives with nearby tools, they learn to send you everything they have left the same way. They followed the signs to a storm cellar dug into a ridge of earth that looked like the back of something resting. Inside, 30 colonists, eyes blown wide with fear and days of too bright lamplight. A woman with a face like a field that has been plowed too often clutched a child. "Are you the help?" she asked, voice not quite believing. "We're the help," Vayer said, which in Cathari sounded like the end of a contract that had to be honored with blood. The woman nodded, small and infinite. "We kept the little ones quiet. We put water on the door hinges so they wouldn't squeal. We left a caution for you if you came. "I'm sorry." She reached for words and found a stitch instead. "We did what we could." "You did enough," Mara said softly, and the words were not a placebo. "You did exactly enough." The Jarn were near, you could feel them, not sound, more like the knowledge that the night was full of teeth even if you couldn't hear chewing. Veyer set a perimeter. Rez seeped into walls and tasted the electricity, his face a grimace when it shocked him with flavors that were not grown for mouths. Keth recoiled, muscles drawn into patience. They came, and the team learned that the tower in the academy had not been a general, it had been a scout leader. The Jarn here had a different center, not a tower but a glory hole in the ground where machines went to drink and came up with new ideas. They called it a well because they needed a word. It was a mouth, a dark that wrote code into anything that leaned too long over its lip. You don't shoot a well, you don't punch it, you don't order it to surrender. You be unglamorous, you be stubborn. Mara looked at the pump house that fed the irrigation lines and then at the well and felt a small door open in a memory. Her grandmother's kitchen sink, clogged with potato peels, and a child's impossible insistence that no, she hadn't tried to put an entire orange down the drain. "You clear a sink by changing the pressure," her grandmother had said, "not by yelling at the pipes." "Rez," Mara said, "how much of you can be a plug without you becoming a memorial?" Rez stared into the well. "I can be a lid, a bad lid, a lid with a hole, a lid long enough." "Long enough," Mara said and smiled a sharp prayer. They ran pipe. They cut old lines and fed new ones. They learned that improvisation is not guesswork. It is the mastery of 1,000 small competencies woven into a net you can throw under a falling day. They filled the well with water, and then laced the water with dissolved salt, and then rode a current across it with a generator that had never had such lofty ambitions, and now dreamed of metals. The well choked, sputtered, coughed back drones that slipped on brine and fell into nets. Kethra learned she could kill a machine by jamming a wrench into a place that had not been designed to confess it was a joint. Veyer took 3 steps forward and made a stand like a lighthouse built of orders and scars. It worked until the well learned to drink salt. "New plan," Mara said, panting, hands bloody with the honest red that pumps when you nick yourself on the edge of a good idea. "We starve it. You starve a mouth by giving it something that isn't food. You fill it with bread made of sawdust and hope it chokes on its own hunger." They poured concrete made of gravel and the memory of a collapsed silo. They mixed resin with soil and the stuff you spray in cracks when you want winter to be polite. Rez became 15,000 small wedges and jammed himself like prayers between wall and throat. The well screamed, not out loud, in the air, in the teeth, in the place stories hide so they can jump out and be used as weapons when the time is bad enough to deserve them. When it was over, the well had a lid, and beneath it the Jarn ate their own echoes. The colonists came out of the cellar thin with survival and full of the kind of respect that isn't awe and isn't fear, gratitude that wears its boots. The woman with the child put a hand on Mara's forearm. "You weren't what I expected." "What did you expect?" Mara asked. "Armor," the woman said, "guns that sing, saviors." "We had a sewing kit," Mara said, "and a pump. And it worked." "Sometimes it does," Mara said, and then added because truth is also an emergency tool. "Sometimes it doesn't, but it works enough." They left the colony with fences repaired, pumps humming, a well with a cap, and a story that warned anyone with antennae and appetite that here the ground had learned to be stubborn. In the shuttle, Veyer sat with hands folded. "The Concord will want to make a doctrine from this," he said. "Let them," Kethra said. "But leave the sewing kit in the footnotes. Doctrine doesn't like needles." Mara slept, dreamed of doors closing, woke to Rez humming a lullaby made of static and victorious purr. Back at the academy, the plaque got a sibling, a simple piece of alloy engraved in 3 languages with a recipe for salt water and a sketch of a pump house. Cadets touched it on the way to class, not like saints, like students, years unspooled. Wars came and left scars and left new treaties that looked like bandages over maps. The genre evolved, as everything does that is insistent enough to keep living. They learned to mimic, to make skins that told the truth long enough to earn trust, and then walked it into rooms where doors were heavy and locks too polite. The Concorde learned too. They learned to ask humans to design the ugly parts of defense, the parts made of ladders and belts, and the quick thought you have with your hands when your brain is too late to the meeting. Mara became not legend but instructor. She hated the word legend. Legends are rooms people enter to lay down responsibility. Instructors are rooms you enter with a pen. On her first day, she walked onto the same deck where Veer had told her restraint. She could still hear the fan thrum that made it feel like the station was asleep under a blanket. She set her kit bag down, opened it, and took out a ball-peen hammer, a length of braided wire, a roll of duct tape, a cloth-wrapped sewing kit so old the cloth had gone thin like an old woman's patience, and a training gun with its magazine removed and a bright orange bung in the barrel. Today, she said to a room of species who had learned to be quiet when you could use it, we will practice ending fights. We will practice beginning them with mercy. We will practice the ugly art of survival. If you are here for glory, I recommend the parade ground. If you are here to keep someone else alive longer than you stay. A Veilborn smirked, a Iharnex blink clicked, a human in the back with her hair in a rough knot raised a hand. "Ma'am," she said, "unarmed or improvised?" Mara's smile had iron in it. "Both," she said, "and then we'll practice the kind of restraint that isn't about muscles. It's about not liking the way victory tastes if you've taught the wrong lesson." She taught them to weave a line across a doorway in the dark by feel. She taught them to listen to the hum of a panel and tell whether it was singing about power or about fear. She taught them to make friends with their center of gravity and then betray it when the enemy expected loyalty. She taught them to look at rooms the way you look at sentences. Find the verb, the subject, the object. If the object is you, change the grammar. Veer watched from the gallery, older, scarred in new places, hands folded as if in prayer, though Cathari don't. He nodded once, small, as if meeting an old compatriot across a crowded bar. Mara didn't make speeches, but in quiet moments she told stories. She told them about the day the door had needed 3 bodies and gotten exactly 3, and how that was not heroism. It was the economy of necessary physics. She told them about the colonists who left knots and threads and stains that spelled directions, and how literacy in the language of the desperate is a soldier's best graduate degree. She told them about Veer, and how instruction is a kind of love that pretends it is only duty. When the Jarn came again, and they always did, hunger is a season that refuses to obey calendars. It was different. They came not for a station. They came for a convoy of hospital ships carrying supplies to a plague world where the disease did not care for sides. The convoy had escorts that would die well and lose anyway. The Concorde sent the Academy because the Academy had learned that sometimes you need fighters who can convince the universe to tolerate surviving with a hinge and a prayer. The fight at the Thuria Drift was less beautiful than the historians later painted. It was ships turning like people in a kitchen too small for 2 cooks and 1 stove. It was hulls taking bites out of each other while telling jokes over the comms because jokes are armor you can wear inside your helmet. It was Mara, in a command chair she hated, telling a pilot to cut thrust and let the Jarn overshoot and then jab the butt of the ship into their soft part like a bar brawl with planets for witnesses. They lost a ship. They saved 5. The plague world got its medicine and later sent a crate of fruit and a painting of a sewing kit. Mara hung the painting in the mess and didn't label it. After, in the quiet you get when a fight's ringing leaves your ears, Veer found Mara on a catwalk looking at the engine's blue hearts. "You did not spend yourself," he observed. "Not today," she said. "Good. I'm saving, she said, for something I can't buy yet. He nodded. You always were thrifty with the right currency. Learned from you. You learned from the floor, he said, and patted the rail. I just kept you from falling through. Years later, because time is generous and cruel in exactly equal measure, Veyer died the way he had lived, at the center of a room, making it safer by being in it. It wasn't a great battle. It was a fire in a habitat ring caused by a child with curiosity and a wire. He didn't hesitate. He stepped in. He carried 2 out. His lungs refused a 3rd trip. The academy named a hall after him. Mara taught there the next day. She didn't mention his name until the end of class. Then she said, Instructor Veyer taught restraint because he respected the lives of his enemies more than he hated them. I won't be that good, but I'll try. When she finally went home, Earth was different, always is when you leave it long enough to forget the angles. Her grandmother's house was gone, taken by a city that needed room to breathe. But the curb had a crack that had been filled once with resin badly. She knelt and touched it and felt the same itch in her fingertips she'd had at 15 when she'd learned she could make a wall say "not today" with caulk and spit. She laughed, stood, and caught herself humming Rez's lullaby. Messages came. The colonists from the Ryan Fold had a festival and named a pie after the day concrete tasted like victory. The Blue House's crew sent a picture of a pump with a ribbon. A Vale-born cadet wrote, I escaped by weaving a room with thread only I could see. Kethra sent a tail flick emoji followed by a picture of a broken wrench mounted on a plaque, and somewhere in the black the Jarn learned a new word. They didn't have throats for it. They didn't understand its poetry, but they learned its outline, improvisation. They started to model it. They learned to fake, to pretend, to hesitate, to make rooms that could be turned against defenders who had turned rooms into weapons. Mara adjusted. That's what you do when the enemy starts copying your homework. You change the assignment. She taught her cadets not only to break rooms. She taught them to decide when not to. She added a chapter to the doctrine called Surrender Beautiful Solutions When Ugly Truth Will Do. It was unpopular. It kept people alive. There were more battles, some beautiful, some not. Some fights were done with words in rooms that smelled like coffee and grief, where admirals shaved minutes off plans the way you shave a beard you keep, because people expect you to. Some fights were done in corridors where the fans still made that sleeping sound, and the only gods listening were the ones who liked the smell of burned plastic. Mara got old enough to feel weather in bones even when metal pretended weather didn't exist. She taught anyway. The new human cadets asked the old question, and she always answered the same. Both. Sometimes she added, and then forgive yourself later for having been exactly as brutal as the day demanded and no more than that. The last time she fought, it was not monumental. It was a shuttle with a jammed door and a coolant leak over a moon that had never had a war and didn't want to start. She wedged herself into a gap, turned her body sideways into a geometry the universe tried to complain about, and held a line while 2 medics pulled an injured child through a space glove would not have fit. Kethra was there, laughing breathless. Rez made a gasket of himself again and apologized for dripping on her boots. After, in the mess, Mara sat with a cup of something that pretended to be tea. Do you remember, she asked Kethra, how this all felt like a class once? Kethra's tail thumped. It still is. She said, we just keep getting new instructors. The universe, the Jarn, the plague, the broken lock. Veyer, you. I don't want to be the universe's instructor, Mara said. You're not, Kethra replied. You're mine. They clinked cups. Rez hummed a harmony. Across the Concord, stories made their rounds. They grew teeth in some mouths and wings in others. Historians polished them. Bar singers dented them. Children turned them into games that taught balance. The plaque in the academy got thumb-smudged by generations of hands. The pump house drawing faded. Someone restored it. Someone else added a small brass sewing needle in the lower right corner, not labeled. On a day like any other, Because important days often pretend to be unremarkable until you look back, Mara stood alone on the training deck and listened. The fans still breathed. The floor still held. She imagined Veer standing where she stood and asked herself what he would say if he could put a hand on her shoulder and anchor her to a meaning. She smiled, shook her head, and spoke aloud into the empty room. "No kill moves in class," she said softly. "Unarmed or improvised." She let the echo answer both, but also neither, when a better world can be bought with patience and the refusal to turn enemies into excuses for monsters. The next class filed in. A human raised a hand. "Ma'am," they said, already grinning with the shared inheritance of a question that had become a password. "Unarmed or improvised?" Mara Keene, cadet once, teacher now, survivor always nodded. "Both," she said, and then added, because the day felt like it needed this part, "and don't forget, the sharpest tools you carry are the people beside you." They drilled, they sweated, they failed and learned. They went to sleep and woke and did it again. And somewhere in the black, a Jarn node thought about wells and doors and sewing kits and felt something almost like confusion. It would learn. It would change. So would they. That's how endurance works. Not a wall that never falls, but a house that keeps being rebuilt after storms, with better nails and smarter hands and a plaque that says we remember. When Mara's time finally eased into evening, she didn't withdraw. She walked the halls, touched the plaque, fixed a broken latch herself because paperwork takes too long to save a finger, and told a young instructor holding a hammer wrong, "Turn your wrist. Let the weight do the work. You don't win by strength. You win by refusing to die." And when the last alarm she would ever answer sounded, she didn't run toward a banner or a stage. She walked toward a maintenance bulkhead where a leak had become a flood and a flood had become a message. If not fixed, children drown. She laid down her toolkit, opened the sewing kit, tied a length of thread around a pipe with a knot so ugly it made her laugh, and held two things together that had no business meeting. Others arrived and took over. She stepped back, breathing hard, and looked at her hands. Older, strong, still learning. Kethra found her there, Res 2. They didn't say goodbye because that's a word you save for planets. They said later, and on a morning that smelled like clean air and fear held at arm's length, a new human raised her hand in a class that would outlive them all and asked, because stories are tools when you hand them down right, unarmed or improvised. Mara wasn't there to answer. She didn't need to be. The room knew. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.